Yarden Lowell didn't do lines. Not for clubs, not for premieres, and definitely not for lunch. But here he was, standing in the middle of a packed Soho café, sunglasses off, hands shoved into the pockets of his tailored black coat and absolutely no open tables in sight. He glanced at his watch. 12:22. His assistant was late, the reservation had been lost, and the place was crawling with people who clearly didn't care they were occupying tables someone like him could buy 10 times over. A waitress rushed past him, dodging a swinging coat and a stroller. "Give us 15 minutes, sir," she said, barely sparing him a glance. 15 minutes. Yarden exhaled, his jaw tightening. He almost turned to leave. He could have a chef from Milan fly in by dinner if he wanted, but then he heard it. "Excuse me," a warm voice said behind him. "You can sit with me if you want." He turned. She was seated alone at a small table tucked near the window, her half-eaten panini pushed to one side, a book open but clearly forgotten. She looked up at him with wide hazel eyes, surrounded by thick lashes and a face flushed from the cold. Her hair was pulled into a messy twist, a pencil stuck through it like she'd done it without thinking. Yarden blinked. "I mean," she said quickly, her cheeks coloring, "you look like you're about to either murder someone or buy the building, and the staff's losing it, so you might as well sit." He stared at her for a beat, unsure whether to be offended or entertained. Then, to his own surprise, he pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "I wasn't going to murder anyone," he said dryly, loosening the collar of his coat. "Ah. So buy the building, then." He let out a short laugh, the first genuine sound from his mouth all day. "You don't know how close you are," she smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm Cassia Ormond." "Yarden," he said, pausing for half a second before adding, "Lowell." Her eyebrows lifted slightly, but she didn't say anything, didn't gape, didn't fumble through an awkward "oh my God, you're him" moment. She just nodded and took a sip from her glass of water like he was a guy named Yarden who had just stolen half her table. He wasn't used to that. It was oddly refreshing. "What's the book?" he asked, nodding toward it. She glanced down. "A fantasy novel about a deaf pirate queen and a cursed map. It's weird. I like it." He tilted his head. "You don't seem like a fantasy type," Cassia grinned. "You don't seem like the type to sit with strangers in busy cafes." Touché. The waitress came by, did a double take at their arrangement, and handed them both menus. Yarden ordered a black coffee and a steak sandwich. Cassia ordered nothing. "You're not eating?" he asked. "I already did." She shrugged. "But I wasn't going to let you stand there looking like the world owed you a table." He raised a brow. "You always invite random men to sit with you. Only the ones who look like they haven't eaten in a decade and might own half of Manhattan." He laughed again, a low sound that made her smile widen. They talked while he ate, about nothing and everything. She worked in publishing, lived in a small apartment above a bakery in Brooklyn, and had a cat named Beans who hated everyone but her. She teased him when he tried to discreetly Google her favorite author under the table. He teased her right back when she admitted she'd never been to Paris. Time slipped past. His coffee went cold. His sandwich disappeared. And for the first time in a long time, Yarden forgot about the emails piling up, the board breathing down his neck, and the meetings waiting for him uptown. When he finally glanced at the clock, it was almost 2. "I should go," she said, standing and slipping her coat on. "You've got billionaire things to do." He stood too, brushing non-existent crumbs off his sleeve. "Let me walk you out." They stepped into the cold together, the city bustling around them, taxis honking and wind whipping through the streets. She stopped at the corner. "Thanks for letting me share my table with you," she said, her voice light. He looked down at her, the wind catching strands of her hair. "You didn't have to, but I'm glad you did." She hesitated, then smiled. By Yarden Lowell, and then she was gone, disappearing into a sea of people like some kind of fever dream. Yarden stood there for a long moment, staring after her. He didn't even realize he was still smiling. 3 days later, he walked into his board meeting late, wearing a navy suit and a distracted expression. "Mr. Lowell, his CFO said, is everything all right? Yarden lowered himself into the head chair and tapped the table. Yeah, everything's fine. But it wasn't. Because for the first time in years, he couldn't stop thinking about someone, not a headline, not a merger, not a property. But a girl with a pencil in her hair and a sarcastic mouth who had offered him half a table like it was nothing. And he hadn't even asked for her number. He stared out the window at the skyline. That was going to be a problem, because Yarden Lowell didn't believe in fate. But he was starting to think he'd just met it. Yarden spotted her again 6 days later, and it wasn't by accident. He'd pulled half his staff into a frenzy trying to track her down quietly. No security sweeps, no obvious tails, no digital footprint violations. Just one name, Cassia Ormond, circulated through a few discreet channels. It turned out she worked at a boutique publishing house in Dumbo, and she edited manuscripts no one read until they became something everyone did. He told himself it was just curiosity. That lie lasted until he walked into the independent bookstore across from her office and saw her crouched beside a shelf, rearranging a disheveled display that clearly wasn't hers to fix. She was wearing a worn denim jacket, boots with scuffed toes, and her hair was twisted again, this time held up by a silver pen. He stepped closer, letting the chime above the door announce him. Cassia turned, eyes widening slightly. You? Yarden dropped his hands into the pockets of his slate-gray coat. Me. She stood, brushing her palms on her jeans, her mouth tilting. Didn't take you for the type to browse rare feminist sci-fi. I'm full of surprises. She crossed her arms, half amused, half suspicious. You tracked me down. I walked into a bookstore and found a woman who once offered me half a sandwich table. That's not tracking, that's coincidence. She arched a brow. You're an extremely well-dressed coincidence. I'm not here to scare you off. You're not. They stood in a pocket of quiet, surrounded by leaning shelves and soft instrumental music playing from overhead speakers. How'd you find me? She asked finally. I remembered your name. That's all I needed. Cassia considered him. That's either very flattering or very unsettling. Can I take you to dinner? He asked, tone even stripped of pretense. She blinked. That's a jump. I don't do small talk. But I remember wanting to keep talking to you. Her mouth twitched, and for a moment he thought she might say no, then she glanced at the clock above the register. I have an author event in 30, but I get off at 6. Then I'll send a car. No, she said quickly. I'll meet you. Neutral ground. Yarden inclined his head. Fair. She scribbled something on a receipt pad, tore it off, and handed it to him. This place has great food. Don't check the reviews, just trust me. He didn't glance at the address. I will. Cassia gave him one last look, then turned back to the shelf. You don't need to buy the store to impress me. I'll try to restrain myself. At 6 o'clock, she arrived exactly on time. The restaurant she'd chosen had no white tablecloths, no valet, and no imported chandeliers. It smelled like garlic and roasted tomatoes, and the tables were pushed so close together that elbows bumped and conversations overlapped. Yarden had never been there, but he'd bought restaurants worth 10 times more that had half the soul. Cassia waved to the owner, who nodded and pointed her toward the back. Yarden was already seated, his overcoat folded beside him, his suit jacket gone. Without it, he looked slightly less untouchable, only slightly. You clean up well, she said, sliding into the booth. You say that like I was dirty before. You were, emotionally crumpled. He laughed under his breath. You always this blunt. I get it from my grandmother. She once told my prom date his tie looked like a funeral napkin. She sounds terrifying. She's perfect. They ordered pasta for her, lamb for him, no wine, just water and bread with olive oil between them. You said you don't do small talk, Cassia said, twirling her fork. So what do? Deals, strategy, acquisitions. Sounds romantic. It isn't. Sounds like it pays well. It does. She nodded, then leaned forward slightly. So why does someone with all that end up eating at a place like this with someone like me? Yarden didn't blink. Because no one else looked at me like I was just a guy who needed somewhere to sit. She looked down at her plate, then back up at him. That's not enough. Maybe not. But it's a start. They ate, and the space between them shrank not physically, but in the way people inch toward each other without meaning to. She told him how her parents had lived on opposite coasts after their divorce, and how she'd always felt like a suitcase no one fully unpacked. He told her about boarding school in the Alps, about the year he'd lived in Tokyo, about the first time he'd realized money couldn't fix silence. They didn't touch. Not hands, not arms, but the air between them was charged like a wire stretched taut. When the check came, she reached for it. He placed one hand over hers, gently but firmly. Let me. Cassia narrowed her eyes. I'm not a charity case. I know that, but I asked you to be here. Let me do this one thing. She pulled her hand back after a second. Just don't tip more than the actual bill. That drives them crazy. Noted. Outside, the street was wet from a light, misty rain, not enough for umbrellas but just enough to make the pavement shine. They walked slowly, no real destination. You're not what I expected, she said. I get that a lot. I mean, you are, but you're also not. Yarden stopped walking. Cassia? She turned to face him. He studied her for a long moment, the city swirling behind them, headlights slicing through the shadows. Then he stepped forward, not touching her, just close enough that she had to tilt her chin to keep his gaze. I don't do this, he said quietly. I don't chase, I don't show up, I don't remember names unless they're on contracts. Okay. And yet here I am. Cassia's voice was soft. Why me? I don't know yet. His eyes searched hers, but I plan to find out. She didn't say anything, but she didn't move away either. Then, as if the moment had reached its edge, she stepped back. I have to catch a train. Let me get you a driver. No, Cassia, I don't want this to become something I can't keep up with. Let it be simple. Just, for now, he nodded once. She walked backward for a few steps, then turned and disappeared into the crowd. Yarden stood there for a long time, the mist clinging to his coat, a strange heat beneath his ribs. He wasn't used to being told no, and he'd never been more certain he wanted to hear her say yes. Yarden's driver waited curbside, engine humming beneath the low thrum of city traffic, but he didn't get in right away. He stood under the canopy of a closed flower stall, raindrops ticking off the striped canvas above. Cassia's footsteps had long since faded into the noise of the evening, but the echo of her voice still lingered. There'd been no kiss, no promise, just that steady look in her eyes and the soft defiance in her voice when she said no. He pulled out his phone. Jules, he said when his assistant picked up, I need a table for 2 at Le Pavillon, private terrace, tomorrow night. You've never taken anyone there. I know. He ended the call without further explanation and slid into the back seat, the car gliding uptown through the mist. The next evening, just after the sun dipped behind the skyline, Yarden stood at the edge of a rooftop garden surrounded by sculpted hedges and candlelit lanterns. The terrace was wrapped in glass and gold, high above the clamor of the city. No paparazzi, no noise. Just an unobstructed view and the scent of jasmine in the air. Cassia walked in wearing a navy coat that flared at her knees, her hair pulled back into a low, braided knot. She paused when she saw him, her gaze trailing over the setup, the soft string quartet. The silver-draped table beneath a canopy of lights. You don't do subtle, do you? She asked. I tried. It didn't work. I thought we agreed on simple. I didn't. Cassia walked toward the table, her eyes taking in the details. This place is booked out for weeks. I own 20% of the property. Of course you do. She sat before he could pull the chair out for her. Dinner came in waves, delicate courses with names she didn't try to pronounce. He didn't offer explanations. She didn't ask. Somewhere between the rosemary sea base and the saffron risotto, she leaned forward and tapped her fingers on the linen. You always operate like this? Like what? Like you've already won. I haven't, she tilted her head. But you think you will. I don't waste time chasing things I don't believe in. Her lips parted slightly, but she didn't look away. Tell me something you've never told anyone, she said suddenly. Yarden didn't hesitate. When I was 15, my father forgot my birthday. I sat in a hotel lobby for 3 hours waiting for him to show. Eventually, the concierge brought me a slice of cake from the staff kitchen. I ate it, alone, her fingers stilled. "Your turn," he said. Cassia looked toward the skyline. I once rewrote an entire manuscript without telling the author. They were devastated when they saw the edits. But the book went on to win 2 awards. They still won't speak to me. You were right. I was arrogant. Those aren't mutually exclusive. She laughed softly. You're not what I expected either. Tell me what you did expect. A man who used expensive dinners to distract from the fact he doesn't know how to connect. And you don't need the dinners. You connect just fine. The waiter cleared their plates and poured more wine. Yarden leaned back in his chair, watching her with a quiet intensity. You're not impressed by any of this, he said. I've seen people with money lose everything and still be the same person. I've seen people with nothing become unbearable the second they get a taste of power. Money's just a filter. It magnifies who you already are. And what do you think it magnifies in me? Cassia traced the rim of her glass. Control, but not cruelty. You're used to commanding a room not because you demand it, but because people instinctively move around you. He didn't respond for a long moment. Then he stood and held out a hand. Dance with me. There's no music. You only need one reason. That's mine. She placed her hand in his. They moved slowly beneath the lights, the distant city a blur behind the glass. He held her close but not tightly. She rested her palm against his chest, just above where his heart beat steadily beneath soft cotton and skin. Why me? She whispered. Because you make me feel like I've stepped out of a world I built and into one I didn't know I needed. Her breath caught. The music from the restaurant below drifted up faintly, a muffled waltz folding around them as they turned. She didn't pull away. He didn't push forward. They just moved together, suspended in something neither of them could name yet. When he walked her to the elevator, he didn't try to kiss her. He didn't ask to come up. He just pressed the call button and waited. She looked up at him once more before the doors slid open. Next time, she said, no rooftop, just real food in a place where I don't need to worry about the price of the fork. Next time, he agreed. She stepped inside, and for the second time in his life, Yarden Lowell watched her disappear into the night. But this time, he knew she'd come back. Yarden stepped out of the sleek black car and into a different world, one entirely unfamiliar to him. The sidewalk in front of the converted brownstone was uneven, lined with flower boxes half filled with herbs and small white blooms. The stoop creaked under his shoes as he climbed it, carrying a paper bag marked from a bakery in the West Village. It was early evening, the sky pale with the last of the day's light, and the hum of distant traffic underscored a stillness he wasn't used to. He knocked twice. Cassia opened the door in old jeans and a faded sweatshirt bearing the name of a university he didn't recognize. Her hair was loose down her back in soft waves, and her bare feet patted against the worn hardwood. You're early, she said. You're barefoot. She considered this. You brought something. He lifted the bag. Bayonets, still warm. She stepped aside, letting him in. The apartment was small, but it felt lived in, books stacked in corners, a typewriter perched on the windowsill, a half-finished puzzle spread across the kitchen table. It was the kind of place that told you who someone was without needing to say anything. Beans is hiding, she said, nodding toward the other room. He doesn't like strangers. Neither do most billionaires, he said, setting the bag on the table. Cassia raised an eyebrow. You just said that like it wasn't completely ridiculous. He didn't answer. Instead, he moved toward the window and looked out at the view. A row of rooftops and fire escapes, laundry lines strung between buildings, the occasional flicker of movement behind curtains. You live in the real world, he said. You don't. I live in a version of it. She pulled 2 mismatched mugs from a cabinet and poured coffee from a French press already sitting on the counter. So why are you here tonight? He turned. Because I don't want to keep seeing you in curated places. I want to see you where you're real. Cassia handed him a mug. You're not afraid of that version? No, he said. But I think I've been afraid of what I might become if I don't find something real. She leaned against the counter watching him. What were you before this? Efficient, calculated, respected, but not known. No, she sipped her coffee, then nodded toward the puzzle. Help me finish that one corner and I'll let you stay for dinner. He took off his coat, folding it over a chair before sitting. What are we eating? Pasta, the boxed kind. I've had worse. Have you, though? They sat side by side, fingers brushing occasionally as they reached for pieces. She hummed under her breath, and he found himself glancing at her more than the puzzle, memorizing the curve of her nose, the way her brow furrowed when she concentrated. At one point, she looked up and caught him staring. What? I've never felt this settled, he said. Not in an office, not in a penthouse, not even in my own house. Her expression softened. You don't need to be impressive here. I don't think I want to be impressive anymore. Cassia didn't reply right away. Then she set her coffee down and turned fully toward him. I need you to hear me on something, she said. I don't want to be the exception in your life. I don't want to be the person you look back on when things go back to normal. If we do this, whatever this is, it can't be temporary. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. I don't do temporary, not with you. You don't even know what this is yet. I don't have to. I know how I feel when I'm with you. She looked down at the puzzle, then back up. I'm not easily impressed either. But when you showed up here in this place with bayonets and no entourage, I saw something I didn't expect. What did you see? That you're not trying to change me. You're trying to meet me. Yarden reached across the table and took her hand. I don't expect you to change. I just want to be where you are. Dinner was simple. They ate on the couch, knees touching, the television playing some foreign film neither of them paid attention to. They didn't talk much. They didn't have to. When it grew late and the city outside dimmed into quiet, he stood to leave. Stay, she said, surprising both of them. Yarden didn't move. Are you sure? Cassia nodded. I don't want a night to be something we forget tomorrow. He stepped closer, brushing his fingers lightly against her cheek. I won't forget any of this. Neither of them said another word as she reached for his hand and led him into the other room, where the only light came from a lamp shaped like a lighthouse and the faint glow of the city outside the window. In the morning, he woke before her. He walked barefoot into the kitchen, found a pen, and wrote something on a torn sheet from the notepad beside her fridge. Then he set it on the counter next to a fresh cup of coffee and one remaining bayonet. By the time she stirred awake, he was already gone. Cassia padded into the kitchen and blinked at the note. It was written in quick, steady handwriting. I have a meeting at 9. But I'm sending a car for you at 6. Wear whatever you want, no rooftop, just us. She smiled. 6 o'clock sharp, the car was there. He took her to a tucked-away restaurant 2 blocks from where she grew up. The kind of place she hadn't been to in years. The kind of place she never expected to see him in. They didn't talk about the future. They talked about colors they hated, the worst books they'd ever read, the music they played when they couldn't fall asleep. After dessert, Yarden stood and walked around the table. Dance with me, he said again. Cassia looked around. Here, right now. The lights dimmed as if the universe conspired. He took her hand, pulled her into his arms, and held her like he already belonged there. She rested her head against his chest. I think I'm falling, she whispered. His lips brushed her temple. Let me fall with you. Weeks passed. They didn't announce anything. They didn't need to. Everyone who mattered already knew, and everyone who didn't wasn't worth explaining to. He showed up to her office with takeout and left handwritten notes in her books. She slipped behind the velvet ropes at his events, whispering jokes during speeches and stealing bites from his plate. When he asked her to move in, she didn't hesitate. But she didn't move into the penthouse overlooking Central Park. He moved into the brownstone with the creaky steps and the half-finished puzzle still on the table. He bought the building quietly, not to change it, just to protect it. Then he handed her the deed. It's yours, he said, so it can always be ours. Cassia stared at the paper, then at him. You realize you just gave me an entire building as a love letter. I didn't want to risk you missing the point. She launched herself into his arms and didn't let go for a long time. 3 months later, on a quiet Sunday morning, he knelt on the same stoop where she'd first told him to take a seat. He didn't have a crowd. He didn't have music. He just had a ring and the memory of a woman who once looked at him like he was simply a man who needed somewhere to sit. "Yes," Cassia said, eyes brimming. "It's always been yes." Yarden slid the ring on her finger, then stood and kissed her like she was the only real thing he'd ever known, and in that moment she was. The morning of their wedding dawned with rain tapping gently against the windows of the brownstone. Not a storm, just a soft, steady drizzle that blurred the city into watercolor and made the world outside feel quieter than usual. Inside, the apartment buzzed with warmth, the scent of brewed coffee and fresh lilies filling the space. Cassia stood barefoot by the window, holding a mug between her hands, staring out at the mist-veiled rooftops. "I thought it was supposed to be sunny," she said without turning. Yarden appeared behind her, already dressed in a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, collar open. "Forecast changed," she glanced at him over her shoulder. "You didn't try to buy the sky," he stepped closer and wrapped his arms around her waist. "I could have. But then we'd miss this," he kissed her temple, "and it suits you." She leaned into him, resting her head beneath his chin. "You're not nervous, I'm marrying you. What's there to be nervous about?" Her fingers tightened slightly around the mug. "I'm not used to good things staying. You don't have to be, I'll stay enough for both of us." They stood like that for a moment longer, cocooned in the quiet, before the doorbell rang and the spell broke. The ceremony was held in the courtyard behind a historic library in Tribeca, where ivy climbed the brick walls and lanterns hung from wrought iron hooks. The rain had slowed to a fine mist, just enough to make the stone glisten and the air smell like earth and memory. There were no crowds, just a small gathering of people who mattered, colleagues who'd become family, a few of Cassia's old friends, and Yarden's assistant, Jules, who'd somehow managed to look both emotional and entirely composed. Cassia's dress was nothing like a society column would expect. No diamonds, no trailing veil, just a simple ivory gown with long sleeves and a plunging back, the fabric hugging her like it had been made for her and no one else. She wore her hair in a low twist, pinned with a single gold comb that had belonged to her grandmother. Her eyes sparkled, not from makeup but from something deeper, something settled. Yarden waited for her beneath a canopy of white flowers, his navy suit tailored to perfection but his tie slightly off-center. She noticed it as she reached him, and instead of a greeting, she reached up and fixed it. "Still need me," she said under her breath. "Always," he replied. The ceremony was short, no sweeping vows, no grand declarations. Just the two of them, hands clasped, voices low as they promised the only thing that mattered, to choose each other over and over every day. When he kissed her, it wasn't dramatic or performative. It was slow, certain, full of promise. The reception was held in the same courtyard, strung with lights and lined with tables draped in deep green linen. Instead of a band, there was an old record player spinning jazz standards, and instead of speeches, there were quiet toasts from people who knew them both as they really were. Cassia sat on the edge of a bench later that evening, heels off, dress gathered around her knees, watching as Yarden spoke with her editor. He laughed at something, head tilted, completely at ease in a way she hadn't seen in anyone else with his kind of power. He caught her staring and excused himself, crossing to her in just a few strides. "Caught you," he said, crouching in front of her. "I was admiring my husband," she said. "You think I'm your husband now?" She held up her left hand where the ring gleamed beneath the lights. "There's evidence." He took her hand and kissed it. "Come with me." He led her through a side gate into a smaller garden tucked behind the main courtyard. There, beneath a trellis wrapped in soft vines, was a table set for two. Candles flickered in glass holders and a silver cloche sat in the center. "You said once you didn't want rooftops and showpieces," he said. "But I still wanted to give you this, just us, no noise, no expectations." She looked around, eyes shining. "You remembered everything." "I always do when it matters." They sat, and he lifted the cloche, revealing 2 slices of chocolate cake, the same kind he'd brought her during a late-night edit session weeks ago when she hadn't left her desk for 12 hours. She laughed, reaching for her fork. "Tell me we're not going to become boring and predictable." He leaned back, eyes on her. "Not a chance. I plan to surprise you every day. You'll never know what's coming. Promise?" He reached across the table, lacing his fingers through hers. "Promise?" Later that night, they returned to the brownstone. Everything was exactly as they'd left it, books still stacked by the window, the scent of lavender from a candle she'd forgotten to blow out. He carried her up the stairs, not because tradition demanded it, but because she'd laughed earlier and said she wanted to feel like a movie for just 1 minute. She didn't need some castle. She had him. They curled up on the couch, still in their wedding clothes, the record player humming something soft in the background. "You remember the first thing I said to you?" she asked, head resting on his shoulder. "You said I looked like I was about to either murder someone or buy the building." "You did," he laughed, pressing a kiss to her hair, "and you offered me half your table." "I didn't know then that I was giving up the whole thing." "You weren't," he said. "You were just making room for me." She tilted her head to look at him. "I love you. I love you more than I've ever loved anything," he said. "And I'll spend the rest of my life proving it." The rain outside picked up again, tapping against the windows like a lullaby. Inside, wrapped in each other and the life they'd built from a single unexpected meeting, Yarden and Cassia held on tight, and they never let go.